Well, we appreciate Josh being here, and we will certainly catch up on everything that Josh has going on, but we'll dive into the Big 12 here. All right. So, despite all the inequities across the board in regards to college football playoff distribution and everything else we've seen, Brett Yormark, as he should, talks very optimistically about the position of the conference and the level playing field and it being the best position that it's been. I don't agree with most of his comments. However, I understand what position he has to take as the commissioner, and I believe he's doing a hell of a job because he is basically just like on the football field itself. When you've got less talent, less resources, what do? Well, you call more trick plays, you call more blitzes, you do whatever you have to do to scheme to make up the gap. And so when it comes to talking about private equity firms, when it deals with naming rights of the conference, where do you think Brett Yormark stands, playing games in different locations, all the things that he's concocted or proposed?
Yeah, so I think this is where he comes in as a guy who is not a college sports guy, right? This is kind of the benefit of that. And the meeting area is that you've got the commissioner being a guy who's a non-college sports but still sports business guy, meeting with the Big 12, whatever you call it. I think it's board of directors or presidents, whatever it is. Those people are more classical college people, right? Brett Yormark can't make a decision without them, so you kind of bring in a guy like that where he can throw his ideas out there and they can kind of pick and choose which ones they like the most. That's kind of, I think this thing works. He's got to sell. So he's got to be selling. That's kind of his job. He hasn't stopped selling since he became the commissioner of the Big 12. And look, like I would give you the example of this private equity conversation and then trying to sell the naming rights. It was a story a couple weeks ago about them doing it. And a couple companies were mentioned, a couple firms were mentioned. It's not really about those specific firms. It's more about the idea as a whole, right? It's kind of a pitch to everybody. If you leak a story about private equity being involved, it's a message to all private equity saying we're open for business. We are down to attempt this. Doesn't just mean that they're locked into one. Same thing for naming rights. You're telling everybody out there, Allstate might be the company that's talked about, but you might be saying, hey, we're open to anybody coming in and potentially doing this. And same thing with the Clemson, Florida State stuff. Like, there's no downside to the Big 12 being linked to Clemson and Florida State. If they don't get them, they don't get them. I mean, what does it hurt the Big 12 to make it sound like they were in the mix for two big brands like that? That's the whole point of this entire thing. And so I think the publicity part of it is the part that he actually can control and he can take care of, because he can't affect recruiting. He can't affect the on-field product. I mean, it's like, maybe in some ways, but like, nobody's joining the Big 12 for Brett Yormark. Nobody's playing football for TCU for Brett Yormark. So he's controlling what he can control, which is the public image part of it. And I think he's done a pretty good job. I mean, all things considered, they're not the SEC, they're not the Big 10.
Absolutely.
But he's got a certain hand dealt, and he's doing a pretty good job with it, I think.
Yeah. Again, I have certainly been impressed with his approach and with his boldness. The ACC could have used that type of leadership over the last several years, and his ingenuity. I just have taken task in regards to, at times, some of the statements he makes that I don't believe are truthful, but right. That's fine. They're not lies. They're just hyperbole to promote his conference and the outlook of the conference. Okay. When we look at teams in the Big 12, again, depending on your perspective, folks, I think it's the most fun conference in college football. It's the most unpredictable. There's going to be the largest number of games every week to say 50-50, 60-40. Okay, Utah seems to be the team that's going to be the highest ranked, but not by much across the board. So starting with the contenders, what are we possibly missing about any one of them? Or what do you think is important over the next month to try to figure out as these teams are in camp?
So I think to start off, at least at one of the big sports books, I'm not sure if you have a certain sports book you prefer, Mark. Is there one that your program's connected with?
No, there is not.
Okay. So at FanDuel, I think they started off having Utah and K-State pretty much at the same odds level. They were kind of co-favorites, if you will, but not by a convincing margin. FPI, ESPN's predictive model, I think it has KU winning the league. And And then I think the media also picked Utah. So you've got all these different things. And then if you can check different magazines, whatnot, people have different predictions. It starts with Utah because they've got the most returning. So they've got the most returning. They've got a really good schedule, and they've got, for my money, definitely a top 10 coach in America in Kyle Whittingham. Sad thing is that I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be doing it, but and also they've got a super good schedule. Things set up really, really well for them this year. So all that stuff combined, I would say I like that a lot. K-State is kind of a number 2. I like it, but like, have we watched Avery Johnson pass the football? Like it's happened. We've seen one game, and look, I saw him throw some in camp. It's not a refined product quite yet, which is fine because he's so young, and that backfield's going to be a really strong backfield. They bring in Dylan Edwards from Colorado. They've got DJ Giddens back, and I mean, we even saw it last year. West Virginia did this to great effect. The three-headed monster they had there with Garrett Green and with Jaheim White and also CJ Donaldson. So they've got a chance to really, run things well. And they needed to make the move from Will Howard to Johnson just because I think personnel-wise, they have a much better chance at running the football first and then passing off of that, as opposed to Will Howard, which is a bit more of a combination of both. So I would say I think KU, I want to say, could do it, but their defense I don't trust enough. They got a lot of guys back on defense. Jalen Daniels doesn't stay healthy enough, and also they don't play consecutive games in the same state. Because they're going to be playing their conference games at Arrowhead, and they're going to be playing their non-conference home games at Children's Mercy Park in KC, where the KC Current and Sporting KC play. So, maybe they fall in a rhythm of being home 1 week, away next week, home 1 week, away next week. But they're going to be traveling a decent bit, and they're not going to be in their own stadium. So I've got some questions there. Oklahoma State, I don't think Alan Bowman's very good. I kind of starts and ends for me with right there. Like God love Mike Gunn, did a great job last year. Alan Bowman's not good enough. I'm surprised they didn't upgrade a quarterback, and I will keep saying that until they can't win a Big 12 championship with him at quarterback. I feel pretty confident saying that. I'll eat my words if he does, but I feel pretty confident in saying that. So I think that's kind of where I am with the favorites. Arizona in there, their schedule's super hard, though. It's really difficult schedule. UCF's defense to me is not good enough. They're not proven enough. I'm not sure where KJ Jefferson is. So to me, it's at the top, Utah, K-State. I would maybe chuck West Virginia in there, but their schedule's really hard too. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think the favorites, they should be the favorites. But once again, this league is pretty wide open.
I've been a KJ Jefferson supporter for quite some time here. I think he's been overlooked. He trucks safeties. He had a 21-4 and 21-5 TD to pick ratio in back-to-back seasons, with coming from a guy that for his first 100 attempts in college football was sub 50%, became a 68, 69% completion guy. I just think that team's going to be fun to watch. RJ Harvey at running back, Gus Malzahn with some weapons that he, of course, can mastermind offensively. But yeah, I don't know. They really did the overhaul in the transfer portal on defense, but it's probably not going to be good enough. Josh Neighbors here from Bleacher Report, again, the Big 12 Watch and 103.7 The Buzz. So yeah, any other thoughts about UCF?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's like, if you could pair up a quarterback with a coach, Gus Malzahn, and I'll tell you what, because like all the talk here in Arkansas was about, would Pittman be gone? Would it be Gus coming in? Gus and KJ, good fit. Well, ultimately, Gus and KJ end up, linking up. It's just it's a UCF, which is weird because if you were to say, hey, if you were to say last year at this time, all right, this is how it goes down. If you had to say where Gus Malzahn from Arkansas and KJ Jefferson, who owns a lot of Arkansas records, end up linking up, you'd be like, well, it's probably at Arkansas if they fire Pittman and keep KJ. No, it turns out they're gonna combine at UCF. I'm a KJ supporter too. Mentally, things really went downhill for him last year. That's not all his fault. Part of it's his fault. I'm curious to see confidence-wise area where he is, and they've got a lot of weapons. He's never really impressed me as a passer. He's kind of got that Cam Newton, like low release point. Looks like a guy trying to bury a slider. So yeah, I'm curious to see, but it's hard because you don't know how good their defense is going to be. And they portaled pretty hard, especially in the middle of that defense. I think like they've got 5 guys in the middle of that defense. Yeah, all their linebacker positions are going to be guys who are transfers. They had a couple transfers in the back end too. I think they can get good personnel there. I just think it's going to take some time for them to adjust the Big 12. And maybe if they want to take that next step, the caliber of guy Utah has is better than the caliber of guy on defense that UCF has. And if you want to think about competing for, winning playoff games, you need to start looking more like Utah and go from there and try to look more like, Georgia. But you have to get to that Utah level first before you can start thinking about going up to that next weight class.
Josh, as you brushed across the top of the league and the expected contenders, you hit on some scheduling quirks, some advantages, disadvantages. I recently posted a video comparing Oklahoma, Texas, what the SEC is doing with schedules for as out in front and visionary as that conference has been on so many fronts. I think they have botched the scheduling for a long, long time. And I went through a lot of inaccuracies there. Rutgers in the Big Ten, and I know that they're not supposed to be a contender. They won't be a contender, but still, when you don't play the 5 highest ranked teams in the conference, just doesn't seem like it's a equitable schedule. So, have you found any just landmine schedules versus what is going on here? Kansas State and Kansas are roughly the same team in terms of how good they are. Why is there this huge imbalance? Anything out there like that?
Yeah, I mean, like I would say West Virginia's schedule. Look, so there was some criticism Brett Yormark took for the way the schedule broke down. But here's the thing about it is that I was doing the West Virginia preview the other day, and they've never played Arizona. And so the way the schedule is going to work out is these first 2 years, everybody's going to play everybody. And to me, that's a good thing because these teams don't have history. So they need to make sure everybody plays everybody over the next few years. Everybody gets home and away and all that stuff under the belts. And so because of that, I think it's like that's a good thing to have. Some other games get lost on a yearly basis because of that. But there's a couple weird ones. We've got some weird things happening this year in the conference. And I don't think the Big 12 is the only conference with this happening. But you've got a situation where there are 2 games that would be Big 12 conference games that are going to be non-conference games. I know Wake Forest and Carolina did this a couple years ago so they keep the rivalry going. But we've got K-State playing Arizona, non-con game, which is a really good game, by the way. And we got Baylor and Utah, the rematch of last year's game. So those are weird ones, and that's what makes Arizona. Because I mean I'm a huge Noah Fifita guy. Like I think he's the best quarterback in the league. But that's what makes their schedule so hard is that they've got to add that K-State game into their schedule. So they're at K-State, at Utah, at BYU, at UCF, and at TCU. It's not the easiest. They have Texas Tech at home, West Virginia at home. So those are still those are tough teams you're going to have to play. And Lord knows how good Colorado is going to be. But that's a pretty difficult schedule for Arizona. West Virginia's got a pretty tough schedule too. I think West Virginia could end up being better than they were last year and have a worse record, much like Florida, right? Florida's got the hardest schedule ever. Florida could end up being much better than last year, but probably still have the same record, if not a worse record.
No doubt. So you like Arizona. Of course, the headliners there, Brent Brennan replacing Jed Fish, Noah Fifita back at quarterback. So they were able to maintain that, which was enormous. And of course, bring back their best defensive player and
wide
Fifita's
receiver
biggest
McMillan.
threat. Yeah. So you like Arizona?
I think Noah Fifita is he's got whatever it is that if people say it factor, that guy is. I mean, I think he could be one of the best quarterbacks in college football at the end of this year. Just what he did last year in the competition level. I mean, he played in some really big games and just seemed unfazed for a guy of his size. He kind of had that. I saw a couple of times in the OU game, especially. He had that spin move Tony Romo used to do, where Romo would range he's right-handed, and he'd spin back and kind of just basically do a 360 spin away from a defender, set his feet and throw. He was really good at that. Fafita's kind of got that down already. And so I think for a guy of his age, his numbers were off. It just popped off the charts last year. And Jonah Coleman's a big miss that they're not going to have in the backfield with him. But if they can get Teteroa McMillan back and healthy and on the field, We'll see what Brennan can do. People seem to think he's a pretty good coach. I don't know much about him to be able to say a whole lot about it, but you got a kid like Fafita. It feels like if he was that good already without a full season being the starter. I mean, he kicked Jaden Delora out of town. He chased him out of town, and Delora was a really good teammate through all of that. But I think it spoke to kind of the attitude of Fafita, that just a humble, positive guy. A lot of confidence. Reminds me of Tua. Just the size, the really good arm too. Maybe not as good of an arm as Tua, but I think he may be a bit more accurate, shorter passer than Tua was at this point of his career.
I'm there with Brennan as well. Winning at San Jose State is not a easy thing to do. They've been awful for generations, and he goes 7-5, 7-6 the last 2 years. That doesn't seem great, but compared to what he inherited, so leave it into the hands. If this was a school that had a great hire after great hire after great hire, I'd be a little bit more confident. But of course, they made a couple bad hires followed by a really good hire. Ironically, the least known of the three was the best hire in Jed Fish, but we'll see about Arizona. Iowa State reminds me of the Iowa State situation heading into, I believe it would have been 2021, after they lost the Big 12 championship game, won the Fiesta Bowl, had Brock Purdy coming back, Charlie Kolar, offensive line. They were just loaded on both sides of the ball with returning veterans who were players, and they fell flat at 7-6. And now they've got another array of veteran players coming back both sides of the ball, and I like Iowa State.
Yeah, so what's interesting about Iowa State is I like how much returning they have. Like that's the positive part for them. The part that concerns me is that I don't know how good the group. I don't know what their like upper level is. I don't really know what the ceiling is for this group, because they got smoked by Memphis in the bowl game. They were not competitive enough in that game, I thought. I think Rocco Beck's really good. I think and I think people believe that, Abu Sama is going to be a really good player. And both those guys are sophomores, right? The tight end's a sophomore. Their receiving core is pretty old this year, which is a good thing. Their offensive line's a little bit of a hodgepodge, a little bit of a mix. But their defense, they bring back a lot, and obviously you know how good their defense is going to be. I was just never blown away by how good they were last year. And I just don't know like how good the group can be. Doesn't mean they can't be good. And I think they've got a really good coach in Matt Campbell. And they've always been a player development school. It's good that they got a lot of young guys opportunities to play last year, because, the betting scandal kind of worked out in their favor. I mean, they just kind of stumbled upon Rocco Beck, right? And it really worked out well for them. So yeah, I'm excited to see what their growth looks like. I think this is like one of those classic Matt Campbell groups. And if they can set a foundation this year, I know it's going to be hard to replace a wide receiver, what they're going to lose. But if they can kind of set a foundation this year, they might be able to take a leap if they can kill it in the portal the following season. Or this might be the season that they're looking for. That's always possible.
Can't let you go without asking about Colorado, the wild card. So try to give us as much intel and perspective on Colorado. I'll throw one stat at you, Josh, that has become my favorite self-proclaimed personal stat that I keep track of. So you may want to add it at some point if you find this valuable. I recognized 7-8 years ago, Street and Smith's, Athlon's, all fine publications, Lindy's, all of them, very conservative when predicting records. Pretty much I'd go through the magazine and I'd say, what were these teams last year? 8-4, 8-4, 7-5, 8-4, staying within about a game. I was like, is that actually what's going on in college football? Because it kind of seems like it, because Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma, they're always up at the top. But then I started to go through that process and I determined, okay, what's a much different season? What's the barometer? I'm going to go 3 games. You go from 6-6 to 9-3, or to 3-9. That's going to be my barometer for being a much different season. I started going through every year for the last 6 or 7 years. That number among the Power 70 is usually about 18 to 22 teams that have that much of a change from one year to the, like a third of the sport. Last year, it was 26 teams Now that was bolstered a little bit by the Big 12 adding the teams that obviously all dropped. But still,
Right.
that was only four
They had to take
teams.
some L's. They took
Yeah, they
those
all
teams
hit
had
a
8
wall.
losses. Yeah.
Yeah. They went 8-28 in the conference.
Yes.
So just to give you a little fodder in terms of, put that in your back pocket, things change across college football, I think, more than I thought, and most people that I throw that stat at.
So Colorado they're not just interesting for Deion Sanders. Like people I think are sick of that. But like what's really interesting here is that you have one of the most independently famous people. He is the most independently famous college football coach, I would argue. Like, like he is, and I think he's the most recognizable person in college football, you could argue. And his son is probably up there in top 5 as well. I mean, I would maybe put some other coaches there, but like his son is really recognizable as far as college football goes right now. Number one is, does he want to leave after his kids are gone? That's my big thing. Is this a building project or is it not? Because his son's gone after this year. And I'm curious to see if he has any designs on leaving Colorado, going somewhere else. Second big thing is, can you build a team this way? Because we've seen teams go portal heavy, like Texas State did a bunch with Jake Spavital. And I know that DJ Kinney did the same thing last year at Texas State, but he's really hoping to recultivate Texas and build from there. Because Deion can recruit. The hard part for me is it's hard to flip rosters like that every single year. It's really, really challenging to do that. And it's also really hard to have top-heavy rosters. Those rosters will do well in September, i.e. last season. Also, another example I give is KU a few years ago. When Kansas had that really nice season, look, they went 5-1, I think, and then Daniels got hurt against TCU, and they end up going 6-6, 6-7 to end the year. So can you build a roster like that way where it's just like depth matters so much? And they have not, to me, built a lot of competitive depth. And the issue that I hated the most for them, I hated the fact that when Deion came in and said, I'm bringing my Louis, he didn't do any scouting of the roster at all to be like, do I have any rotational players here? He just told everybody to go kick rocks. And he didn't treat the guys who could have been rotational players pretty well. And like, you need those guys because it's not all starters. Because if you're going to play Travis Hunter 100 and some snaps, you better have somebody behind him that can play. And I did not like the fact that he demoted Sean Lewis last year. I understand why you want Pat Shermer because you want NFL feel for your son at quarterback. But like, veer and shoot's what you run, because the big problem with them is too, they can't run the football at all. But like, your short passing game needs to be what you run. You do not need anything pro style. Like you should be West Coast. If you're going to go like any NFL offense, and I'm not even sure how much West Coast really left out there. It's kind of up for debate. But like, if you're going to go air raid concepts, which are all over the NFL, like it should be screens, short passes, stuff over the middle, because Shador is actually a very, very accurate passer. It's one thing that he is. So I don't feel like the decisions are all adding up. Like, he's getting good personnel, got a good quarterback. They had really good game plans in September last year. They had really strong game plans. It's just not consistent enough for me to pick out anything. Like, they might do what you're talking about this year, Mark, but I'm a really like, show me. I want tangible evidence and proof. And there's not enough out there consistently across the board that like shows me, like they were less competitive in games at the end of the year than they were in the beginning of the year. That's a huge concern to me. That's not the way you want to go. So it's just really hard to prognosticate about how good they're going to be when that was the case.
And my thought process going into 2023 was, they're throwing 80 some players together for the first time.
Yes.
They should be better later in the season.
Right.
And then once they ripped off the wins against TCU and Nebraska, I thought, wow, I didn't think that they were going to beat Oregon and all these other teams, but I thought, wow, this is going to be a team that is going to probably get to that 6-6 range and maybe pull off, maybe as they kind of scared USC, they
But
might
USC
be able to
couldn't
pull
stop
off one
anybody.
major upset. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Josh, we appreciate you being here. We want to make sure that everyone knows where to find you and what you've got going on.
Yeah, so you all can find the Big 12 Watch, 365 Sports. You guys can find it. Crystal Ball College Football is the channel. Also, Big 12 Watch, wherever you all get your podcasts. You guys can find me on X/Twitter at JoshNeighbors_ and at NWPod365. I also do streams for Bleacher Report periodically as well. And then if you all wake up between 6-10 a.m. and you want a show, it's a little bit of sports and a whole lot of everything else crazy. Morning Mayhem on 103.7 The Buzz is where you all can also find me as well. It's on YouTube. It's on TuneIn. It's on the 103.7 The Buzz app. And Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Appreciate you having me on.
Always smart stuff. Josh, thank you so much for being here. Have
Yes,
a good
sir.
day.